Welcome to the Driving Change podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Driving Change podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jeff Bloomfield. How many of you out there think that you're funny? I know my wife tells me that I'm like, you just didn't get my joke. And she's like, I got it. It just wasn't funny. Well, every once in a while, I really like to bring on people who are funny. And today's guest, Jeff Allen, who I know many of you already know, he combines his clean and really hilarious humor with his inspiring life journey. And it's touched millions around the world. And Jeff, he doesn't just make you laugh. He makes you think, he makes you feel, and I hope today you're going to feel that you were glad that you tuned in. I'm sure you are. He's just had an inspiring career for not just business owners and entrepreneurs, but comedians as well, and he's touched so many lives. Over 400 million video views across YouTube and Facebook, and he's appeared, you guys know, you know this guy. He's been on America's Got Talent. He's got Netflix specials, Amazon. He's been on Dry Bar Comedy. I'm going to ask him about this, but I'm pretty sure he coined the phrase happy wife, happy life. So if you know where that comes from, you've probably used it. This is the guy who originated it. And I'm not going to tell you any more about his story if you don't know his backstory, because we're going to unpack that as we go. Jeff, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Jeff. It's rare I get to work with a guy with the same name, so that's nice.
Yeah, and in the same level of comedic prowess.
Absolutely. I always like it after shows when I'm standing at the table. The husband starts to tell a joke, and the wife just gradually backs up behind him and starts rolling her eyes. And my thing is, I used to do a thing at the end of my show. I used to tell a joke that I had heard and said, you could repeat this, you could tell it, and because then you're not doing my stuff and ruining it. Because someone's going to ask you, where were you last night? Oh, I saw Jeff Allen. Well, what kind of stuff did he do? And you're going to start trying to repeat what I did, and you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to just chop it to shreds. So here's a joke you can tell, and hopefully that was enough to sate the desire to run up and tell me a joke, because I don't know a lot of jokes. I played golf once with Glenn Campbell years ago, and he said, I guess because you're a professional, we have to pay you to get a joke out of you. And I said, I didn't hear any Rhinestone Cowboy coming through the woods while you were in there chipping out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's awesome. Well, let's start where we start with all of our guests, and let's the folks who don't really know your backstory, and many that know you and are fans of you probably don't know the original origin story of Jeff Allen, little Jeff growing up in Chicago or born in Chicago. Take us back as far as you want. Tell us what the early days were like in your family life and who really influenced you, and then we'll kind of get into your journey and where you think got things off the rails and back on the rails again. But take us all the way back to the early days first.
I was in a town we grew up in, was one of those prefab towns that back in the 60s, they would build a house somewhere else and bring it in panels and nail it onto a foundation. We were called Cardboard City by all the other surrounding communities. And we were tiny, small. We didn't have any traffic lights, and played in the streets till all hours of the day. Played in the summer. We played out until 10 o'clock at night. Never had any initial worries about anything. And everybody knew everybody, and everybody went to school together for 8 years. And then I got bussed into a high school, and that's where all of a sudden things began to change. It was a different world for a lot of us, And my first day of high school, somebody tapped me on the shoulder and cold cocked me, knocked me down. And it's like, welcome to Bloom,
Wow. Well, yeah.
I remember going home and telling my parents we were not religious. My father was an atheist. I said, I want to go to Marion, the Catholic school. And he said, I'm not spending money. Get over it. He said, nobody knifed you.
That's good. Said, well, there's some contrast
response
for you.
Yeah, great response. I was, a tiny kid. I was 5'5". I played basketball. I made the team, shockingly, at 5'5", 5'6". And basically, I kept the charts. and I used to get punched by the guys in the locker room because I'd actually circle and put their number where they shot from. And the coach would get mad at them because they were shooting outside 25 feet in high school. So they'd punch me, draw the circle closer so I
Yeah.
don't get yelled at. Baseball was the game that I really thought would get me out of our little town, and I was good. I really was good, and then I got out of high school, and I didn't want to go to college. Nobody, it's interesting. I watch and I talk to people whose parents. My manager told me this. He said college was never even an issue with us. They were going. From the day they were born, they were going to college.
Right.
And my father told me freshman year of high school, if you study hard and you get good grades, I will sell my house to put you through school. But if you screw off, you're on your own. And 4 years later, he came to me and said, you screwed off, you're on your own. So I managed to get invited to a junior college. Again, I just wanted to play baseball. The education part was never drilled into me, and I didn't realize how important it was. I don't know necessarily anymore if a university is the way to go now. I just signed up for Peterson Academy online. I'm studying the Intro to Nietzsche right now. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
deep.
some chipper stuff to chew on before you go upstairs to sit with your wife and have a conversation.
You're looking for some really unique original material now. I
Right,
see where you're
exactly.
going.
Well, that's what I'm kind of hoping it'll spark some different direction.
Yeah.
So anyway, I graduated high school barely. Didn't even go to my ceremony. We had about 900 kids in our high school. Matter of fact, my 50-year reunion is this October, and thinking of going. I went at 10, realized why it had been 10 years since I'd seen any of these people. So 50. So a lot of them, because of Facebook, as I travel, a lot of guys I'd played baseball with in high school are reaching out, and we're sitting down and having meals. And it really kind of be nice to sit with them for a couple days and just go over some old times and talk about a bunch of lies. We'll be able to
Of
lie
course.
together always. But anyway, I got to college and then started drinking probably my sophomore year in high school, and that became a weekend thing. My brother was 5 years older than me, so he would buy whatever I wanted, and so we were drunk every weekend. And my first really big drunk was, I wrote about this in the book. Are we there yet? Was at my sister's wedding. I was probably 13, 14. And I remember getting sick. And this kind of says it all with my father. If the education part didn't tell you, then I had thrown up in the bed and I couldn't get up. I was just too drunk to get up. And my mother was coming in to clean it. And my father said, if he wants to drink like a man, let him sleep in it like a man. So there wasn't anything about, you shouldn't be doing that. You should, it was just, so anyway, my first real recollection of what a man is. If he drinks hard and he handles it. He doesn't throw up and he doesn't, but if he does, he sleeps in it.
Wow.
Yeah, a little distorted view on what I
Yeah.
think a man should be today. But anyway, that was kind of, they drank every weekend. My parents, back in the '60s, America, everybody had bottles at everybody's house, and they would just party at different houses every weekend. And I grew up around that. And my brother, again, he started me at buying it on weekends, and I took to it. It made me gregarious and outgoing. It's not that I was shy. I mean, when I played sports, that's where I really connected to my esteem. My esteem was connected to that.
Right.
And my whole self-worth was connected to how well I did on that field. And anyway, I got to college and I was drinking at lunch. I'm a catcher. We had pitchers that were drafted by professional teams. They threw well into the 90s miles an hour, so my reflexes were a little slower at 3 in the afternoon than they were earlier. And again, my sophomore year, I was ineligible because of grades. I didn't want to go to school. I don't even know how I made it through the first year. But anyway, the coach came to me and said, I can't use you because of your grades. And Anyway, I was devastated. I remember sitting in a gym just sobbing. What am I going to do? Went back, got a job at a jewelry company. And a couple years into that, I was working a jewelry show and somebody said, hey, let's go to the Comedy Cottage. And I said, what's that? And they said, a bunch of comedians get up. And I thought, oh, wow, that might be interesting. So anyway, I was hooked. It was in August of 78. I went every night that I could go, 5, 6 nights a week. And by November, I had worked up or drank up the courage to try it. Thanksgiving night, I left my parents' house and stopped at the club. It was open mic night. And I went up and it was horrific, just horrific. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it. I was doing magic, close-up magic. I had learned it from a friend at college. And I would entertain at parties and stuff. I was fairly adept at that, but nothing great. And I tried to bring it up on stage. I was dropping things. I was a nervous wreck, just an absolute nervous wreck. So that was Thursday night. Sunday night, I went back to do another open mic. And they said, you're going to have to make sense tonight. We have no idea what you said Thursday night. We're still trying to figure it out. You were just gurgling. And I saw that was it. I started comedy and it was just horrific. The MCs didn't know if I was going to do 5 seconds or 5 minutes. I mean, I'd run off, look at the crowd, draw a blank and run off the stage. A terrible stage fright. It's funny. The joke is I was afraid people would laugh at me, And didn't want to humiliate myself. I was already humiliating myself, which I realized was actually the greatest training I could have gotten.
Right.
I knew guys that were really funny. They had a great 5 minutes to start, and they never ventured into new material because they didn't want to feel what it's like to not be getting laughs. So they stuck with the tried and true. Well, I didn't have any tried and true. I had nothing. So every night was just a hit and miss. And then it was like 2 months into it, I saw some guy writing in a notebook, and I said, what are you writing? And he said, well, I'm getting my set together. I go, you prepare this stuff? And he goes, you don't? I go, no, I just thought you went up and talked about you. He goes, wow, that explains a lot. We've been trying to figure you out for a couple of months. I just go up and talk about guys at work or whatever, And the first joke I ever really got, I had a Volkswagen Bug that kept breaking down. And I had no money to put a starter in it. So I had to park it on a hill, run it down the hill, hop in, pop the clutch so it would start. So one night I was late, the car stalled. I couldn't get onto a hill. I couldn't start. So I had to run the last mile to the club to make my show time. And I come running through the door. I'm dripping sweat and just hit the stage and started spewing about this Volkswagen Bug. What a piece of trash. I've owned 3 of them because I couldn't believe how bad the first 2 were. I said, the frosting system is your breath in a rag. God forbid you get the heater working. It'll burn every hair right off your ankle. It's like driving around with a flamethrower on a floorboard. I mean, I was just going, and I realized like in 30 seconds, I'm going, my gosh, they're laughing. I'd never gotten any laughs. And that was it. I was hooked. And I realized for me, comedy was truth and comedy was angst. If I could just figure out how to continually express the angst over something I've told the story 100 times, but at least people would relate to the truth.
So you're tapping into that. So to make sure I'm clear on this, so you went from jewelry store to comedy, but it was clear that you weren't a ringer.
No, I was not. No ringer. I got it.
See what I did there? See, I told you, I think I'm funny.
That's good. I'm glad
They're
I got
dad
it.
joke. The dad jokes just flow right out of me. They're natural.
Yeah. My son sends me dad jokes. I just sent him a Babylon Bee video of a recovery room for dad jokes. It was a bunch of fathers who were trying to recover from telling bad.
I've seen those.
Bad dad jokes. Yeah.
All right. So then, you became a diamond in the rough. See, I'll just keep going. Anyways, so what we're going to do. All right, I'll stop. You're the comic. I'm clearly not.
Oh, you're rolling, man. Don't stop.
Right. Tell me though. So during this time, you're still struggling. Maybe you didn't even realize you're still struggling, but you're still heavily into alcohol.
Oh gosh, yeah. I was drunk every night. I always said if you like to sleep, get a job at a mattress factory. If you like to drink, figure out a way to make a living in a bar. And when I got lucky by 1980, by 1980, I had about 10 or 15 minutes of passable material. And the clubs exploded in 1980. I mean, they were all
that was
over.
The heyday, right? Back in
they
the
were
club
ubiquitous.
days.
And they didn't have enough comics to fill in all the spots, the MC, the middle act, and then the headliners they brought in from New York and LA. So I was able to travel around 50 weeks a year, really. I had no responsibility whatsoever, which was good because I was irresponsible. And so I was able to party every week and develop some skills. Within 4 or 5 years, I was headlining comedy clubs. And again, it's a different market now, but back then you'd come in on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, you'd stay through Sunday or Saturday.
Now, were there comedians that you saw in that when you were kind of doing the middle part? Were there comedians that you had seen and you started to recognize, man, they treat this like a craft, and I'm going to start
Yeah.
dialing in a little bit? Who were the ones you kind of looked at as wow?
Well, the first one to give me some really just solid advice was Larry Miller. Larry, if people look him up, he's probably one of the best storytellers ever. He used to tell a ski story. It would take 5 to 7 minutes just to tell, and it was just funny. Gosh. And I was so blown away by watching him. And I was sitting in my in the condo. They put us up in apartments, 2-bedroom apartments back then. So I'm sitting there in the living room and we're talking. I said, man, I really, really appreciate what you do. That's the kind of stuff I want to be able to do. I just have a hard time writing material. And he said, can I say something? And I said, sure. And usually when men preface a conversation, can I say something? They don't want you to punch them, because
That's right.
what's coming isn't going to be easy. So they go, I've been kind of watching you for the last couple of days, and you got some funny stuff, but it seems to be about life, your life. A lot of drinking stuff and whatever. But in the condo here, I've never, you wake up at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you sit here till 5:30 or 6, and then you go to the club. Not a lot of life is going to happen in your life if all you do is sit on a couch. So maybe get up a little earlier and go to the mall, walk around with a notebook or something and start just kind of getting moving. And it made sense to me. And that kind of started me at least trying to find other ways to find humor other than just my life was drinking and drugging. And, I would make fun of that. And in my lack of relationships, I had, oddly enough, I couldn't find a woman that found me attractive. It's amazing when you're trashed every night, you know. So anyway, that was some of the best advice I got. But Larry Miller was one of the best, and then Seinfeld gave me some great advice. By then I was headlining clubs. I was married, but I worked with him right when he was starting to really break at a college in New Jersey, and we were waiting for checks. And after about 45 minutes, he said, "Can I say something to you again?"
Right.
And he said, "Don't get upset." But he said, "In all your complaints, and there's been a lot of them here in the last 45 minutes, I didn't hear you complain about how hard you work on your craft. I heard about all these things you have no control over. I got to get the Letterman people. I got to get Tonight Show people. I got to get all these other people to like what I do. Just work on your craft. Get good at what you do. Get so good they can't ignore you. And all that other stuff will come." He said, "I've never really had to look for work. I just get as good as I can at what I do. And then it's a small industry. People talk." And he was right. He was right. I mean, I really heeded that advice. It was like, okay, then I'm going to get so good. I'm going to work on my stuff. And and really, there's like 3 transitions in my career, and the third one came in Arizona. We were married 6 or 7 years, and my 4th grade son got caught cussing at his teacher in class. And I went, my wife and I were called in. It was pretty nasty. And I said to the teacher, "I'd love to be able to look you in the eye and seriously tell you I have no idea where that child heard that kind of language. But, unfortunately, my wife and I, we don't really filter ourselves." And then he had been in nightclubs as well. I would take him. Can't imagine why I never got Father of the Year. My son at a comedy club in Queens at 2 in the morning on stage telling a joke. So anyway, we were driving home, and Tammy said, "That's a reflection on us, and we need to clean up at home." So I paid my kids a quarter for every bad word they heard, and basically how I funded their college. But anyway, I wondered if I could do it in my show, and it's about 2 years before I gave my life to Christ, and I look back in hindsight as this was maybe him preparing me for my future jobs. But
At this point in that time period, you're married and you got a couple kids. Are you sober yet? Have you hit
yeah,
that
I've been
part?
sober 7 years. Yeah.
So let's back up to that point, because I'd love the audience to hear, because I know there's so many folks that are in a moment right now where they're struggling with some form of addiction, or they're in the
Oh.
first phase of recovery. And I just think it's such a powerful, your testimony there is so powerful. Like, what was that moment like when you said, okay, that's enough, I'm doing something different?
Well, I write about this in the book. First 6 chapters of the book is the
Right.
our you know, getting to recovery early, in our marriage. I was about a year sober. I had 2 incidences that I write about that you'd think would have gotten me there. The first one was I was in front of the club one night doing cocaine, and I hear a rap on the window, and I look up, and it's a Boston policeman. And I get handcuffed, and I'm getting put into the cruiser. And an off-duty policeman who was just working the comedy club for security reasons came out to smoke a cigarette, and he sees me in the cruiser, and he says to one of his fellow officers, "What's he doing?" Well, he was doing cocaine. We're taking him in. And he said, "Let him go. He's one of the comedians," as if that's a get out of jail free
Right.
card.
Right.
So,
Right.
but it turns out it was. They took me out of the cruiser, and he's undoing the cuffs. And he said to me, "You have no idea how lucky you are. The DA is up for re-election, and this is the time of year they start throwing white suburban boys into jail
Mm,
because it looks good on camera. And you were looking at 3 to 5 minimum.
wow.
And I had a 6-month-old at home. And the whole time I'm sitting in that cruiser, I'm thinking, when am I going to see these kids again?
Wow.
So anyway, he lets me go, and and again, this was the '80s, so they let me drive home. You know? Yeah, and I just get in the car, go home, and so anyway, you think that scared me, not enough. Probably 3 nights later, I was so drunk, I'd gotten up I went up the exit ramp. I went up into the wrong side of the interstate and was driving uh, into traffic in Boston at 2 o'clock in the morning, and
Wow.
managed to get myself off of that somehow. I don't know. And then I was driving home. We lived in Framingham, which was 30 minutes maybe from downtown Boston. Took me 2.5 hours to get home. I wound up in the Cape. I had no idea where I was at. I was just trashed and driving, and got home, and I woke up the next day, and I again trying to put all of that together. Where was I? What did I? Oh my gosh, and looking at those kids, the baby, and my oldest was 3 years old, or 4, 3 actually, and but it wasn't until probably July 4th. That was June sometime. So July 4th, I went to a party, and of course Tammy says, "Let's go home. The kids need to eat dinner." And I said, "You go home. I'll get a ride home. I'm staying. I'm not gonna stop partying." So anyway, somebody dropped me off at home, and I was sitting in a room trying to figure out where all this guilt and shame was coming from, and couldn't put my head around it until I realized it all started when I got married. I never really had a lot of guilt or shame connected to my life. I did what I did, and if I got arrested, and I had a handful of DUIs and whatever, but that's just part of drinking. So anyway, I decide, and I write about this in the book, so I'm not breaking any um, news, but I realized if I beat her up, she'll divorce me, and then I can get back to the way things were. I can just send them money. And I was standing over my wife, and the voice inside of us that God puts in all of us, that conscience, is like screaming at me, "This is wrong. You can't do this." And in the midst of all that, my 6-month-old starts crying in the crib. So I got to quiet him down so he doesn't wake my mother up and ruin my plan. And anyway, I ended up spanking him. And Tammy got up and took him away from me. She said, "Oh my gosh, who does this to a baby?" And she sat on the end of the bed and fed our son. And that was it for me. I
Mm,
told her, "If you don't take me to get Alcoholics Anonymous, I won't go. And if I don't go, we're not going to make it." And that was it. I went to AA. They said, "Pray." I said, "To what?" And that really started me on it. God It's interesting how God works in everybody's life. You get those road to Damascus moments like Paul had, where it's just like Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting? I mean, enough is enough. Why are you persecuting me?" And it would have been nice if that was my journey. You know, if God sat me down and said, "I'm going to put you and your wife through this for the next 7 or 8 years. But at the end of this, you're going to know my son Jesus, and you'll know a peace. You'll know this peace." I wouldn't have signed on. I really wouldn't have. And this is why. But I believe we went through what we went through so we can help others. Every metric the government keeps that breaks up marriages, we did just about. From infidelity to alcohol and drugs to bankruptcy to cancer. I was shocked when I read the statistics on how many marriages break up when one spouse gets cancer. You talk about something that I couldn't get my head around, even at my worst, to bail on my wife when she's just starting that treatment. And I couldn't imagine that. But um, so anyway, that's kind of what we went through. Those first 6 chapters, I tell audiences if they can get through the first 6 chapters of the book without killing themselves, is an uplifting tale. It really is. I gave Tammy the last draft and I said, "I'm going to send this to the publisher, but you got to be okay with my version of what we went through."
Yeah.
And she read the first 2 chapters, came out of the bedroom crying and said, "I can't read anymore. We were really horrible people." And I said, "Well, finish the book. We turn out okay. We really do. We turn out okay. God's a good God." Anyway, she finished the book and came out, and we spent 3 days, 40 hours, line by line, going through that book and correcting my version of what we went through. So
Right.
it's truly our book, but it's yeah, I had to get sober to stay married. And I told a friend of mine about a year into sobriety, and I wasn't a poster boy. I'm the reason it's an anonymous program. I was not a poster boy for the program. I was an angry, bitter, jaded, cynical, foul-mouthed human being. And I told a friend of mine, he had the same issues I had, drugs and alcohol, and young children. I said, "You're going to come home one night, you're going to look at those babies, and what's going to wash over you will either get you to get the help you need or you're going to flee. One or the other. You're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to look at that day after day because you're a good, decent human being. You just got
Yeah.
a drug and alcohol problem." Anyway, I found out he had moved to San Francisco. The ocean stopped him, and he fled. But now
Yeah.
he's clean. You know, it was many years later, but it was. I'm grateful. I was told I'd be grateful for my alcoholism, and I am. Without it, I don't know if I would have sought the help, the true help I needed. It's just a symptom of what's a lot deeper seated.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wow, what an amazing story. And then to watch how God used you at that point forward, it was almost like, he let you go through the desert for all those years just to as part of your ultimate purpose, which you've been living ever since. So you make that pivot, you get sober, but you don't immediately, come to Jesus, right? You
Oh
immediately
gosh,
like,
no.
okay,
Oh no,
it
I
took another
started.
several years.
Yeah, I was in. I got in the kitchen again. These are stories I share in the book, so
Yeah.
I'm not. There's no new ground here. But I got into an argument with Tammy in the kitchen in New Jersey. Now we did what they call geographical cures. Every 2 or 3 years we'd move, and they're called geographical cures because you think naively that if you just move your family, things will get better, and it is for a while. You're in a new place and different situations and things. But eventually, the baggage you brought with you that is
Right.
getting in the way of a healthy marriage is what rears its ugly head. So we got into an argument in the kitchen one night, and I stood on a stool. I ended up climbing on a stool and screaming at her until she dropped to her knees and sobbed. And then I put my son to bed. He's like 6 now, 7 years old. And he said, "Daddy, you win." I go, "What do you mean I win?" He goes, "You yell, mommy cries, you win." And not a proud moment for me. It really wasn't. I went downstairs and I apologized to Tammy for the 1,000th time. And I said, I'm trying, sweetheart. I really am. I'm going to get help. And I did. I went to a meeting that next day and I raised my hand. Anybody know a therapist? And I went to work for a therapist. I went to the therapist for the state. It was $15 an hour. And I always tell people, if you're looking for help, go to somebody who works for the state. They're not in it for the money. There's no money.
Right.
They're actually in it to help you and get you out so they can bring more people in. And she was great. A matter of fact, I'm thinking of reaching out to her. I just looked her up on Facebook to see if she was still alive. She was older than I am, and she's still counseling
That's
in her
amazing.
70s.
So that was kind of the next tipping point. The next crossroads was that.
Right. Well, then she put books in my hands. I never read a book my entire life. I have severe attention problems, and she put Road Less Traveled in my hands.
Mm,
And I remember two things from that book that stood out. The beginning, the first line: "Life is difficult." And when it can be accepted as such, it no longer really is difficult. It becomes a series of problems that need to be solved. So, as an atheist and a secularist, that kind of resonated. And as a man, men look for manuals. They look for
right.
something to fix. If something's broken, let's figure out a way to fix it. And that's kind of the way I approached my recovery. I said, okay, obviously I'm a lousy spouse and I want to be a better one. So how can I do this? And then the second thing I got from is somewhere in the middle of that book. He says, true love can't begin till conflict enters the relationship. And that resonated with me because I hated conflict. Conflict resolution in my childhood home was pretty simple. If you disagreed with my father, he threw you against the wall, and then that was the end of the conflict. You just took his word, and then you learn not to talk back. You learn, and then my brother carried that forward. As 5 years older than me, he broke my nose twice in fights when we were older. So I just learned to hate. I mean, I hated conflict, which is why I never had a relationship. Because every time I had a girl that I liked, within a week or two, conflict entered the relationship, and then I'd flee. That was the end of the relationship.
Right.
So now I got married, and now conflict enters, and believe me, we had serious issues, and I couldn't stay in the room. I couldn't stand being in the house. I couldn't stand. I used to tell my counselor, I'd said, as the plane would descend into wherever we were living, whether it was New Jersey or Phoenix, the anxiety would start. To get home. I knew I was failing as a man. I really was. I mean, every checklist thing that I would put there, to protect my family, to provide for my family, and to be a strong force, but gentle enough, to where they weren't afraid of me. I didn't want my kids afraid of me. I was afraid of my father. I didn't want to put that in them.
Right.
So anyway, conflict can't begin. A relationship, love doesn't begin till conflict enters. So, in other words, there is no such thing. And even with my relationship with Jesus, I've had conflict. I mean, because I can't live it, and It's interesting. I had a friend of mine. I was not raised in a church. I wasn't raised anywhere near a church. And then 5 years into my walk with Christ, I find myself, I'm a legalist. I am a stone cold legalist. To myself, not to others. I mean, I
Right.
believe me, my life precludes me from ever judging another.
Right.
But on my own walk with Jesus, because I'd sin, I'd raise my voice, I'd get angry, I would whatever. I just couldn't live it. And a friend of mine came to me, a very dear friend of mine, and kind, gentle, and smart. And he said, "So God's grace isn't enough for you." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, basically, what you're telling me is you've got this certain list of rules in addition to the grace. So, what are the rules, and should we all apply them to ourselves, since you have taken the role over as God
Right.
of your life, the Lord of your own life?"
You had the Grace Plus model.
Right. I had plus plus. I had plus plus. So, and there were times that and it was interesting. I'd be ready to go. I just would go. I can't do this anymore, Lord. I can't. And I was ready to abandon. And then that there's an interesting story I tell in the book when Tammy and I counseled for the first time. We couldn't sit in a room together for 20 minutes. They had to separate. They tell Jeff, go in the hallway. You can't. But in that 20 minutes, she asked Tammy what she wanted from their time together. The counselor said, "What is your goal here?" And Tammy said, "I want him to be the way he was when we first met. He was a lot nicer to me then." And the counselor kind of laughed because she said, "It'll never be that way." And that's what Scott Peck talked about in the book. The illusion is the euphoria, and that God gave us that euphoric feeling as an art of attraction. Solomon talks about it in Song of Solomon. is the art of attraction. That's what attracts us to each other, but that keeps the species going. But the
Right.
reality is,
Right.
you guys are going to butt heads, you're going to argue, you're going to, and you better learn how to do it from love and respect from that position. So anyway, I was at that relationship at that point with Christ. I just couldn't live it to my standards, and I was ready to abandon it. And I remember getting on my knees and specifically saying, I want it to be the way it was when we first met. I had a nice
Mm.
honeymoon with Jesus for a couple of years. I
Wow.
really did. And everything was about. I'm watching Russell Brand go through it now. I just think it's so cool. I go, yeah, that honeymoon will end at some point, but God bless him for and reminding us what that new relationship is, and it has to be renewed every day through prayer. And I realized that I'm too far along with Him. My life has changed in so many profound ways that I'm not going to abandon it. I just have to learn how to live with me and make Him Lord of my life. And that's still, even after 20 whatever years now of walking with Him.
Man, that's such a great insight, though, for all of us that are believers to be reminded of. Wow, I never even considered it that way. So that's pretty profound and that's pretty deep. So how was the transition? I'm curious because here you are, this comedian. You're snorting you're snorting coke in the parking lot in the car, and you're drunk every night. And you're up telling using crass language, telling jokes from your life of living basically in the gutter,
Right.
essentially. And then all of a sudden you get out of addiction, then you become a believer, and you start to pivot into this actual, for lack of a better term, this clean comedy, if you will. And
Well, I
and how
got
were
clean
you
after.
afraid that you weren't going to be as funny? Like, I'm curious how that transition made, or did you just kind of naturally realize, hey,
No.
this is actually funnier?
What happened was my fourth grade son got caught cussing at his teacher.
Right.
And I came home and decided I'm going to see if I can do it in my show. And again, in hindsight, I'm thinking God was preparing me for that work. So when I got to Nashville, when we moved the last time, it's funny, we got our life right with God, and we've been in the same house now for 27 years.
Isn't that interesting?
It's not the same house, believe me. She is,
Right.
every
Right.
time
Right.
I
Right.
catch her looking at Zillow, all right, what do I need? What do I need to gut? What do I need to change? I'm
Right.
not moving. I'm being buried back in the backyard like Elvis. I'm just going to
Right.
be like
Right.
a
Right.
rodent. Put me in a box and throw me in the backyard. So anyway, I got into. I was in Vegas on 9/11,
Okay.
2001, and couldn't get home. So I came home and told my Jewish manager I want to start working somewhere else, other than clubs. And I was older, the audience never got older. People that go to nightclubs are still 25 to 35 years old.
Right.
So I felt like I was really just babysitting people who drink. And I wondered if churches would hire me. In the first year I put it out, I was going to do a churches, one church. Um, when your resume is casinos and nightclubs, pastors tend to hesitate to give you the microphone for
Right.
45 minutes,
Right.
especially when you call yourself a comedian. I'm not a speaker. I always tell them when they introduce me as a speaker, I go, I'm not. That would give you the reasonable expectation you might learn something. You're not going to learn anything from me, nothing. So anyway, I was doing a show on a Sunday night at Ryman Auditorium. I went in to visit a friend of mine. We had just moved to Nashville, 98, 97, somewhere around there. And he said, you want to go up and do 5 minutes at the Ryman? Are you kidding me? So a couple days later, somebody called me at home and said, we're doing a show for the Christ Presbyterian Choir at the Belmont Mansion at Belmont University in the living room. There's like 25 people in the living room. Would you be willing to do a show? We don't have any money. I go, I don't care. I'm a new believer. I'd love to do it. So after that show, there was a woman talking to me, just rattling on and on and on and on, like 5, 10 minutes. And there was a guy standing behind her. Thought it was her husband. Anyway, she walks away, and I said, "That's not your wife." He goes, "Oh no." I said, "My gosh, you got the patience of Job." I
Right.
would have walked away. I wouldn't have sat and listened. I would have ran her off if I'd have known you were another uh, person.
Right.
Anyway, he says, I work with a guy named Bill Gaither. And I said, who's that? And he goes, you never heard of Bill Gaither? I go, no, I haven't. He goes, oh, this is going to be better than I thought. And anyway, he said, we do a gathering in Indianapolis. And anyway, it turned out to be Gaither's Praise Gathering.
Yep.
And Bill Gaither's stamp of approval on what I do opened up a bunch of doors. His fans, that their churches began to hire me. And I didn't
Yeah.
really have anything to offer in form of ministry. And one of the breakout sessions at the Praise Gathering, somebody came to me and said, could you mention you love your wife? And I said, they don't know that? And he goes, well, nah, but and you're funny, but you hit her kind of hard. So it'd be nice if at some point you softened it up by mentioning you love her. And so anyway, I do a 15-minute breakout and I'm leaving. And I remember I got to go back and tell them I love Tammy. So I walk back while they're still applauding. And I go, look, I got to tell you, God blessed me with this most amazing woman. And I start talking about her and what we've been through. And I start crying. I mean, crocodile. I couldn't get through it. And I get done. Tammy's waiting off stage. She looks at me. She goes, what the heck was all that? I'd never seen it before. And other comics were coming to me going, my gosh, what was that? I go, I don't know. I never. But that became my ministry. I would do outreach. I would do stand-up comedy. And then I would share those 5 or 6 things that we got through as a man and wife.
That's
And
awesome.
I love the verse, when you become married, God makes you one flesh, and there's no better. And I tell audiences, even in the nightclubs, when I share the story, that whether you think it's a metaphor or whether it's the divine work of a creator mind, it's true. When you start to divorce, the pain and suffering you go through, it's like ripping flesh. I can't think of anything in my life that has caused me more pain. I do a line in my show where I read where women are like onions. They're just layers and layers that you have to peel away. And I said, that resonated with me because nobody's made me cry more than Tammy. Like an onion, So, yeah, as I peel the layers away, I weep a lot.
Right. Well, your observational comedy, and then as you developed your career, and I think so many now you got comedians that are using you as an example, right? And I love the influence that you've had on this genre, because I really do think it's changed a lot of folks' style and approach. And I think people should, if they don't, they should credit a lot of that to you and others that have done.
Well, and guys like Brian Regan and Jerry Seinfeld. Seinfeld also told me that night when we were sitting there. He said, you don't work clean. And I go, And he goes, why do a joke that works for 300 people when you can do a joke that works for 200 million people? At that point in the 80s, it was all about getting on Letterman or The Tonight Show. You had to get on the box. That's what he called it. You got to get on the box. You can't get on the box.
I can hear Jerry saying it.
Yeah, you got to get on the box. And he said, and Regan, at that time, we were peers. We were working the clubs in New York together.
Yeah.
And Brian worked clean, and no, not for religious reasons. He just kind of went at it because it worked for him. And again, if it works, it's the best way to go. I don't ever have to sit and worry. Nobody's going to walk out on me because they're deeply offended. They're going to walk out on me because I might not be funny to them.
Which is different.
Well, that's a different thing,
Right.
I mean, but especially when you work in a corporation, I always look at the CEO's wife. If she's laughing, I'm good.
You're good. That's right.
If she's got her arms crossed and she's glaring at me, he's going to get an earful, and that's not good.
Right. You mean I get booked back? Even like today's modern comics, like a Nate Bargatze, I think they've fallen into that mold, right? Of folks that can come and do clean observational comedy, and that's why they're killing it.
Right. And I'm working with his dad. Coming
up right?
October 11th at the Fisher Center in Belmont.
Are you guys doing a magic show together?
Well, no, he's going to do the magic. I'm just going to do the comedy.
Are you got to have a few jokes in there about you being a failed magician and fire, right?
We've talked about it. Believe me. I've tried to do a couple card tricks for him, and I'm still a nervous wreck. I drop things.
That's so funny. Well, let me talk about, as we close here, one of my favorite quotes from your book, and if we're going to point people to your book, Are We There Yet? My Journey from a Messed Up to a Meaningful Life. And you've already heard, the folks listening, you've already heard a lot of the stories, but you don't get the depth of the stories until you read through the whole book. One of my favorite quotes in here And of course, it's the Driving Change podcast, so this one resonated. You can't force someone else to change, but you can change the way you love them, and sometimes that's enough. And I think that, man, in a lot of ways, that encapsulates a lot of your story in your life. You had to kind of choose change for yourself. And then as a result, change the way that you approached others, including your wife, Tammy, and the relationship that you guys have developed over the years. And I want to thank you for the example that you've been to so many people, not just as a comedian, but as a man, like who's gone through struggles and not given up and, and looked at, we don't all have the perfect backgrounds and we didn't all come from the perfect families. In fact, none of us did. We're just lying if we think we have. And to take that background and that story and then turn it into something that's meaningful, and only through the power of God that you can turn your life into something that's given back to others.
You get that vertical right. You get that relationship, and you really understand. I mean, when he does the work through you, you know it.
Yeah.
Something changed. And it's funny. I share a story in the book about what when Jesus said, "Don't worry about this life. I'll send a counselor in the form of the Holy Spirit to help you basically navigate your way through these waters." And our car broke down. We had a terrible car, 87 Olds Cutlass or something. It just, anyway, had bad intake valve, took forever to get up to 40 miles an hour. We just waved, people honking at us, one finger at a time, anyway. So anyway, the car breaks down. And, that was usually a moment for me to break into some self-pitying tirade. And I turned around and I said to my son, I saw a gas station about a mile or so back. Let's take a walk. We'll go get some help. It was before cell phones. And then Tammy says, "That's it?" I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I was really kind of expecting you to smash or break something." And I said, "It just dawned on me that mechanics pray to God too." And, I tell audiences, okay, it's not a road to Damascus. It's not that profound to you, but to me, it was everything.
Yeah.
Because the voice, again, if you read and study scripture, you may not be able to memorize it or quote it, but God has got it in there as that new nature that you're trying to build up, to
That's
kill
right.
out the old nature. That verse came to me. I'll send it. So I looked up. I remember walking with my son, going, "Is that the counselor? Is that the counselor?" It is. So
Yep.
it was profound for me, and that's all that mattered. So I believed it to be true, and I started to try to pray to build up. But the old nature's there, will never go away,
That's right.
ever, and it's this constant tug and pull of I always say I have the peace that surpasses all understanding till I put a golf club in my hand.
Well, now you're really speaking my language there. I can certainly relate to that. Yeah, you want to see how well developed your faith is. That's the way to find out, right? You can
Right.
find out a lot of truth about a man when you put him on the golf course.
Right. Well, I care about the game. That helps. I mean, I have a lot of friends that don't get upset because they don't care.
Yeah.
I finally, at the age of 68, I think, and I have shoulder surgery. I can't play for like 5 months. And I found out I can read again. All these things that I stopped doing because golf got in the way.
Right.
Yeah, and podcasts, which are nice.
You host a podcast still or no?
No, not at all. But I did yours. I would have been on the golf course at 11 o'clock. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. So tell people where they can go to learn more about you. Maybe look for booking. You're still out doing shows, and
Oh
you're
my
still.
gosh, I'm busier than I've ever been.
Yeah. Tell us some more about where you can find more about you and your books and everything.
JeffAllenComedy.com is the website, and then you can click on all the icons to connect to my social media. The Facebook fan page. Again, we post videos every day, trying to get people to laugh. I don't post. I can't think of anything I posted. Again, I was at the Republican National Convention because Rob Schneider canceled. They called and went in. I talked about my wife and kids. I don't do politics. I don't know that much about it. I'm a casual observer of the culture.
It's probably better to stay that way.
Well, I didn't tell the story. Why my father, he went to Vegas to see Alan King, and his dream was to see Alan King live in Vegas, and he finally got to go. And Alan King spent 30 minutes talking about politics and taxes, and it just angered my father to no end. He goes, "I didn't pay to hear some rich guy talk about his problems.
Right.
I came
Right.
to laugh and forget about mine." So I've never forgotten that. That was kind of my goal, was to just always make people forget, and release those endorphins that laughter creates, that God put in us to laugh. I say this and I mean this with all my heart. You can't tell me that Jesus didn't laugh at those disciples.
Oh,
You
he had
know?
to have.
Yeah, when Peter said, "I'm with you," yeah, right. Yeah, right. You're with me. It
Yeah.
doesn't read that way in Scripture, but I'm telling you, that's the way he said it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You're gonna
There's no
you're gonna be
question.
with me, buddy. Okay. Yeah.
And I think that, that's a great place to close. I think that, the scriptures tell us that Jesus experienced every emotion that we as humans experience, and one of those was laughter. And I think my guess is that band of ragamuffin knuckleheads, they had to be a lot of laughter
Yeah.
out in the woods trekking around with him. So thank you for tapping into that emotion of laughter for us and all that you do. And those listening, go to jeffallencomedy.com. Get his memoir book, Are We There Yet? You're going to get to learn a lot more depth of everything we unpacked here.
Yeah, you can get that on Amazon. They'll just ship it to you in a day.
Perfect. Get it on Amazon and check out where he's going to be touring and go out there and hear him live, because there's nothing like him. I've seen him live. My wife and I had a lot of great conversations after that show. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And they can bring the book out and I'll sign it.
Excellent. Even better.
It's interesting. I love it when I get done with the show and taking some pictures and guys bring over the books, and I get to sign them and they get to tell me what they picked up out of it. It's quite an honor because I'm not a writer.
You went from never even reading a book to writing books. How about that for transformation?
Absolutely. Only took 40 years.
That's right. So there's hope for everyone, right? There's hope for all of us.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, Jeff, thank you again so much for being on. It truly was an honor.
Thank you, Jeff. I had a great time.